Welcome to another episode of Breaking into Cybersecurity. Today we have Sandeep, who will be joining us and sharing his background into cybersecurity. Sandeep, tell us, the audience, a little bit of background about yourself.
Thank you, Christoph. Hi, everybody. My name is Sandeep Poda. I'm proud to be working at DQS as Global Program Director for IT Audits. I manage the IT Audits, Information Security Audits for 27001, 20000-1, SMS, and many other standards. I have more than 33 years of experience in the industry. I began with telecommunications and I worked in telecom for security, quality, capacity, and customer service planning. And then slowly I transitioned into the wider information security area. I have been in this information security area for about 15 years now and have completed 4 years managing the programs at DQS. It's very
So,
exciting to be in this area because it's a growing threat and everybody across the board needs help.
so when you first got into technology, younger in your career, what got you interested in technology and how did you grow in your career?
It's a good question, Christoph. Thank you. It started with my education. I have a bachelor degree in electronics and telecommunications. And then I continued my academic studies with two master's degrees, one in computer engineering and one in computer science. That's what got me very interested in telecommunications and the security around communication.
So, as you got your first role with those, it sounds like very advanced degrees. What were your first roles in, and how did your education translate to your first roles? I know the environment was quite different back then, but how did your education translate to those roles?
The focus of my communication was engineering, specializing in communications and telecommunications. So my first role was to measure the capacity and do capacity planning for specific clients. So we were producing large telecom switches and all the peripherals for the wireline and wireless industries. And my job was to perform measurements and then write reports about the security, performance, and capacity of these individual items. Customers can understand the security and develop their systems by understanding the performance and capacity.
Okay. And as you as you evolved from that first role, from writing those reviews, how did you grow in your career that you thought would be translatable to others that wanted to follow in your footsteps?
Things have, like you said, Christoph, things have changed so much over a period of years. Now the turnover is quite fast. The rate of change of information security threats is way more intense than it used to be at that time. Supply chain vulnerabilities, artificial intelligence, all of these new areas are impacting the clients, the organizations around the world in a more severe way. So for people who are starting now, I would say that keeping up with the development of new programs, generating AI, how generative AI is being exploited by criminal actors for automated and realistic phishing, how malware is evolving, how ransomware is evolving, what are the supply chain vulnerabilities that affect countries in a very large, on a very large scale. For example, a recent attack, the AI platform SenseSoft was attacked last month, potentially impacting over 700 companies. So Understanding the logistics, understanding the technology and the threats behind it is very important for one to identify which area they want to practice, what would be their expertise, and how they can contribute towards the greater good in information security.
I like how you broke that down, understanding which of the various areas they would like to develop their expertise, because the field is growing so broad that you can't master them all anymore. You can know a little bit about everything, but you can't master everything. So, how do you recommend or how do you mentor those that are below you to find their calling or do the discovery to find out what they might like?
I think educating oneself about the status of security threats is the way to go. There are so many areas. I My son is going through university right now, and he is specializing in cybersecurity. But compared to me, who is in compliance, he is more towards the software portion of cybersecurity. So he runs a white hat organization for his university, and they participate in capture the flag organizations events and help various organizations with their newly learned knowledge. So one can be hands-on in the trenches with technical abilities, or one can be at the policy and process level with compliance or auditing expertise. So these are just two examples which are very different areas in cybersecurity. The best way to find out is to educate oneself and see where they gravitate to, what could be their expertise once they start learning that area.
Yeah, you're spot on, and even for example, psychology majors understanding the psychology of a fish or a business email compromise, how you would go about as a threat actor doing that. From a defensive side, how do you educate users that they use these psychology tricks on you? Now you can raise awareness and you're doing this from not necessarily a technical perspective, but from a human psychological perspective and how you translate this to business risk and sharing this with the business users. Now, you mentioned that you're doing this on the compliance perspective, and I'm guessing that you've had a wide set of experiences across your lifespan, across many different countries. Assumption on my part, but would you say that the compliance perspectives from one country and a different country might be different? So investigating that is also critical in their careers?
Yes, I fully agree. And I agree with your assumption as well. I have had the good fortune of working in many different countries in Europe, North America, India, and I have gathered the knowledge of various cultural aspects of working in different countries as well. So I fully agree with you. Things vary mostly because the legislative action is different in various countries. With the example of growing AI developments, we need to have appropriate regulations for ethical use of artificial intelligence. Europe has EU AI Act, which has very severe penalties for unethical use of AI. While in United States, we repealed the regulations recently so that innovation can grow at the fastest pace possible. So different countries have different legislative focus on how to treat this change of technology. That reflects in the skills gap as well, because in order to comply with the EU AI Act, the organizations in US are going to be not so focused on it, but organizations in European Union will be more focused on it because they will have severe penalties and their skills with respect to compliance would be much better than the skills in rest of the world.
I was having a conversation with a privacy-focused individual earlier from the UK, and we're having a similar conversation from GDPR in Europe and the UK versus privacy here in the US. And while the US is lagging, it's making progress, but still lagging compared to the rest of the world. But from a helping an organization that might be multinational, put its best foot forward to tackling a multinational approach, what are some of the best techniques that you would recommend for individuals to help them comply with multiple different compliance policies at the same time?
That is a challenge that everybody is facing. In short, there is a worsening skills gap across all of information security frontiers. So, with respect to compliance, for example, for the new standards, it is difficult to find auditors who have the ability to audit these new AI standards because they do not have sufficient experience in this field. As the field matures, people are going to gain more experience, and eventually we will have experienced people who will have the ability to audit. This is just one example, but the rate of innovation is so fast that people are not catching up with the skills. So the skills gap is worsening in various different areas. In addition, the vulnerabilities are spread across so many platforms and so many areas. It's overwhelming for organizations just because the sheer volume of reported vulnerabilities is very large, putting intense pressure on IT teams, for example, to quickly prioritize and patch and keep systems updated and safe. That also leads to cyber inequity. So smaller organizations, for example, do not have enough funds to dedicate towards this keep up. All of this translates into more opportunities for individuals to identify areas that they like and build their expertise in those areas.
Definitely agree with you there with carving out your niche in the industry and showing that you can be that SME in that area. However, I'd challenge you on auditing anything with AI at the speed that AI develops, because how does one challenge the way that AI is written, the way that AI makes decisions, or the way that AI agents make decisions at the rate that you're developing? By the time you finish assessing or auditing an agent, it's already been sunsetted for a model that's two or three models newer. So how do you recommend that folks deal with such a, I hate to say it, rapidly evolving landscape?
It's a challenge. I fully agree with you. It's a challenge for everybody. The latest AI standards that auditable is ISO 42001, and it is distilled to a very higher process level. So when we use that standard to audit, we audit against the controls that are defined in that standard. And we do not really audit the technology, but we audit the ethical principles that are governed by those controls.
Yeah, I've helped some organizations in the healthcare industry compare the NIST version of that, and while there's no NIST certificate for that, they have a similar AI assessment framework that you can use for that approach, and it's really about doing QA testing and validation of your methodology, and that you're using a consistent approach, that you're red teaming, that you're making sure that your data is clean. But for folks that are coming into the industry, or maybe folks that are evolving from a different part of the industry, any recommendations on how they can take the skills and capabilities say, from a different part of the industry and transition into this industry based on the transitions you've done over your career?
So there are so many different standards. ISO has 60,000 different standards defined. And even within the QS, we have various different program managers in different countries who manage programs ranging from aerospace or sustainability to food and IT audits. There are specialists with expertise in their areas who can apply their expertise to these various standards and identify which areas they want to grow in. Within IT, there are so many different ways people can develop their skills. Compliance is one, and just because I work in this area, I would just talk about that one can identify and align their experience and background with a certain set of standards, and then develop expertise in auditing those standards, for example.
And like you said, there's so many different standards. So for an organization that, say, might be building up their GRC program and their GRC capabilities, any tips and tricks for an individual or a department to build up those skills and capabilities internally?
I think that's a very good approach for organizations to take. I have seen successful organizations manage these programs because their compliance people are qualified to be internal auditors. When a team has sufficient skill set in understanding how to audit their own programs, then they can affect the quality of those programs. Of course, one cannot audit their own work. So teams typically split up and audit each other's work internally and find nonconformities and participate in a continuous improvement process. So educating teams to participate in a continuous improvement program is the best way to proceed.
I like the continuous improvement approach, but you brought up a very interesting point that you shouldn't audit your own work. But that brings up an unintended bias of influence within an organization, wh- which is one reason that you should or could bring in an external auditor for major assessments. When doing your own internal audits, what are some best practices to remove that internal influence over the internal audit team?
You're right. So for budget limitations, most organizations hire an external auditor to conduct their internal audits before they come to DQS for their external audits. But larger organizations with higher budgets, they could implement their own internal audit programs. So they identify people who are trained in conducting internal audits, have the required certifications or training, and then the internal auditors would audit all the different various teams to complete the internal audit reports. However, if the internal auditor is also part of implementation of certain areas, then they cannot audit their own work. I used to be in an organization where we did the same. So we had two different people who were qualified to be internal auditors, and we would audit each other's work to make sure that we don't have any conflict of interest.
So here's potentially a challenging point to a topic we discussed earlier is the use of AI. AI is growing in its skill and capability every day. Its ability to interpret natural language, intent, when it comes to looking at audit requirements, when it comes to looking at the way that your policies and your security controls are written, could they not replace internal auditors or some sort of assessments, at least for an automated assessment someday soon?
It's within the realm of possibility. I have seen many different products that ask questions just like an auditor would and interpret whether the policies, the processes, and the objective evidence presented is sufficient to meet the requirements of a certain control. So, in theory, it can be done, but at the same time, I don't think that we are at a mature AI level just yet where we can replace human auditors who are trained to find nonconformities and participate in a continuous improvement process.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I've seen some programs evolve to the state where they remove the human in the interview process and they go straight to how are the security controls implemented? How are the security policies written compared to a standard and highlight the inconformities to the audit team and raise that in the program. But you still need that human in the loop to make that final decision. And I've found that many organizations, when it comes to the ultimate decision of business risk, still haven't defined that down to a numerical number or a number that AI can make a decision for them. There's still a lot of intuition and gut feeling in their decisions that they haven't been able to replicate in any other fashion as yet.
I do agree.
As we're helping prepare the next generation of students like your son and others that are interested in preparing for coming into this field, what recommendations would you have for them?
In addition to completing their coursework and getting good grades, I think it is very important for them to recognize the what I called earlier as the worsening skills gap in the area of cybersecurity and information security. Once they recognize that, they can identify where they can contribute while they are still in school. That prepares the best foundation for them to leverage themselves into the working environment after completion of their degrees.
For applying to roles, have you seen, at least from a hiring manager perspective, that automated tracking systems have made it easier or harder to find qualified candidates?
It depends on the area as well as the application of automation. In my opinion, this is such a new field that it is very difficult for hiring managers and hiring companies to identify the correct candidates. In the past, things were very clearly defined in terms of application of one's experience and knowledge. But now it is very difficult to identify for newcomers, for people who are new to the industry. It's difficult to identify their caliber. So that is why I mentioned that for students to contribute towards real life uh, information security work is very important because just grades are not enough to indicate their expertise with the best practices in information security areas. Part of it is finding internships during the summer. That definitely gives them an understanding of the work environment as well as helps them identify the areas in which they want to build their expertise.
So, in addition to doing podcasts like this, I partake in B-side communities, and yeah, of part there's hiring villages, and some of the complaints that we're starting to see from those that might have been laid off is that they're applying to more and more roles, but either they're getting less feedback or less responses in roles, what recommendations would you have for those that are already in the field to better stand out as they're looking to apply for their next role or apply for a role because they may have been laid off from their previous role?
It is certainly a challenge, and it's a sign of times. I think that the job market is weakening a little bit. So I get that feedback from the overall sector as well. My recommendation is to be more proactive in identifying areas where one wants to work in and then build up expertise in that area, which sets them apart from other applicants.
Do you think that the use of AI to polish their resume may help or hurt them in the application process?
So many times I see emails or resumes and documents that are built with AI, and you can, at least at present, you can tell that AI was used and it wasn't really reviewed or edited after the use of AI. So one has to be careful. These are very powerful tools that can give us more information, but still our own diligence in that area is very important after having used that AI tool.
I like that. Our own diligence. Like the banner they display, it might display inaccuracies. So just like you would want to validate that there's no inaccuracies in the information it presented to you, you still might want to give the letter or the document your custom flavor, your own voice to set yourself apart from everyone else that might use that same tool to customize their resume to the same job post. Otherwise, all the resumes will look the same to the same job post.
You're so right. And hiring managers, people who are looking at resumes, they are not there to sit and analyze it for endless period of time. A resume gets a few minutes of attention, and one needs to make sure that there is sufficient weight in that resume to catch somebody's eye and make a difference.
I like that. One last tip for that. What would you recommend to give that last piece of weight to that? Is that in the introductory statement? Is that in certain pieces of evidence that they might include? Where does that weight weigh the most to you as the hiring manager?
So more and more companies are looking for people who can hit the ground running. And when I started my career more than 30 years ago, companies used to invest in training newcomers. That investment has been consistently reducing, and now people want somebody who can contribute from day one. So identifying the requirements from the job description and making sure that you make an impact with your resume and with your interview to show that you can hit the ground running with the requirements that they have makes the difference in being selected.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Sandeep, for taking time out of your day, for sharing this advice, for sharing your career journey and these tips and tricks.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you, Christoph, and great conversation.